Very good evening, members. Hearty welcome to each one of you for today's study circle on the topic critical issues in income tax. We have Mr. Prashant T.S. with us to present on the topic. I now request panel and past chairman C. Ravindra S. Kori to kindly escort the speaker on the dais. I also request Ravindra S. Kori sir to kindly present a floral bouquet and welcome our speaker. Round of applause. This. Thank you, sir. Members, just to give a brief introduction about our speaker, Mr. Prashant G.S. is a fellow member of Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, practicing in Bangalore. He is a graduate in commerce, pursued chartered accountancy course and qualified in the year November 2006. He is practicing in the field of direct taxes and is mainly involved in search and survey matters and many other. Before setting up his independent practice, he was working as manager taxation in Singvi Devanuri, Chartered Accountant firm in Bangalore. He is currently a co-opted member of Committee on International Taxation, constituted by SIRC of ICA, and life member of Bangalore IT Bar Association, and is presently serving as its joint secretary. With this very brief introduction, I welcome Mr. Today's programs. Over to you.
Good evening, all. At the outset, for having given this opportunity to share my views on critical issues in income tax. Before we begin, we are indebted to our parents for life, but we are indebted to our guru for the way we live. I take this opportunity to place on record my deep sense of gratitude and respect to my mentor, C.A. Venkatramani, who has been a guiding force and factor in my endeavor and profession. Also, my respects to C.A.D. Devraj and C.A. Shankar, who mentored me at various stages of my professional career. To set the tone down, in this trying times of COVID, Bangalore branch has taken great initiatives of arranging the programs for members to attend both virtually and people who want to attend physically also. Chance has been given. It's a good initiative. Probably in days to come, we have to see as to how it progresses, whether we go back to the complete virtual mode. But the hope is that we should come back to 100% physical mode, which means you would have fought the COVID and things would have returned to normalcy. With the hope that things will come back to normalcy at the earliest, we will start the discussion. In fact, I was under the impression till about afternoon that it is a virtual meeting, which is why the PowerPoint was not prepared on those slides, because I thought I was sitting in my office and deliberating on the issues. Now that I'm facing the members, I will try to engage the members to the extent possible to ensure that you will not fall asleep. We will try to pick out those issues where some bit of tinkering with the brain is done. We will start with reassessment. As most of you are aware, the entire reassessment proceedings have been revamped in the recent budget, which proposals came in Finance Act 2021. Now, after the Presidential Assent, it's become the Finance Act 2021. So, the entire reassessment proceedings have been revamped. What does it do to the reassessment proceedings? What is the change that the present proceedings have as compared to the earlier provisions? Is it a drastic change or is it a procedural change? Or have they taken a mixed approach to combine a lot of them? Why I'm trying to say this is, certain facets of 147 which were probably the lifeblood of 147. The terms reason to believe, full and true disclosure. Those terms do not find a mention in the revamp 147. And the other criteria which were there of reducing loss, income being added, those things also have been. And then now it's a very simple provision. If any income chargeable to tax in the case of an assessee has escaped assessment for any assessment year, the assessing officer may subject to provision 153, subject to provision section 148 to 153, assess or reassess such income or recompute the loss of depreciation allowance or any other allowance or depreciation for such assessment year. So, the lot of preconditions which are there, saying that the assessing officer has reason to believe that income has escaped assessment was one way. You also had the assessment is completed earlier under 143.3. If that assessment had to be reopened, the mandatory condition was that there ought to have been a failure on the part of the assessee to not to disclose fully and truly the particulars during the initial assessment. Now those things don't find a mention in 147. What is the importance of the term reason to believe? Now that it is not there in the statute, is it a vice because we will not discuss it today? No. Unless we get to the issue as to what was the reason to believe, which legislation is wisdom now as decided to omit. What happens is, once it's a reason to believe, it was supposed to be a belief of the assessing officer based on tangible materials and evidence and a personal satisfaction, which means he must have been personally satisfied that these are reasons or the factors that determine leading to income escaping assessment are present in the case of an assessee, and therefore it necessitates a reassessment being done, or in a case where no return was filed earlier, to assess the income for the first time by virtue of lapse of time in terms of 142 time period being elapsed and so on and so forth, to directly issue under 147 reason to believe. And if you look at the judgments, plethora of them, thousands of them in the public domain, probably one can understand that in many cases the department has lost on this count that the reasons given were not reason to believe. Because one important distinction between reassessment and search, we will discuss such issues a little later, is that reassessment was always on reason to believe and not reason to suspect. And you could not have done investigation in the guise of assessment. That was Supreme Court in Chugmal Rajpal 7988-603, saying that the officer cannot use this proceedings to do an investigation. Investigation is a separate arm and has to be taken up separately. Be that as it may, once that particular link out does not find a mention, think reason to believe, where does it leave with? Now, you had the celebrated judgment of Supreme Court in GK and Dreyfus, 259 India, page number 19, where Supreme Court laid down certain procedural aspects to say for the issuance of license recorded. That is, if the assessee so desires, the assessee still had a right to file a rejoinder to the speaking order, but that would not take away the right of the officer to complete the proceedings. Now, what have they done? They have brought in 148A, that is between 147 and, that is after 147, you have 148, which already existed, though they have revamped it. They have brought in 148A, where the assessing officer shall, before issuing any notice under 148, this is a new facet here. 148A is a new facet, where they say, officer, before issuing a notice, can conduct an inquiry if required, with the prior approval of specified authority, with respect to the information which suggests that the income chargeable to tax has escaped assessment. So, we'll pause here for a moment. We'll see here, which means departing from the earlier provisions, now the assessing officer has got the power to conduct an inquiry before the issuance of notice itself. And that inquiry has to be conducted with the prior approval of the specified authority. And on what basis? The basis is with respect to the information which suggests that the income has escaped assessment. So what do you construe this? If you look at 148 here, now we have seen the first name where the prior approval is there. 148 in the new version, before making the assessment, reassessment or recomputation under 147 and subject to 148A, the officer shall serve a notice on the assessee along with a copy of the order passed if required under 148A clause B. Which means again, you go back to 148A and see how the procedural aspects. So the entire thing has been revamped, and we have to now give due emphasis to the terms with the prior approval of the specified authority. What does this prior approval mean? It is not a mechanical signing off on the document given by the assessing officer. The moment you say you're supposed to take an approval from the higher authority, it presupposes that such higher authority has applied his mind to the proposal or contentions raised by the assisting officer, which in his opinion is resulting in income escaping assessment, which means the approval which is given has to be after due application of mind. It cannot be a mechanical approval. It is not something, if for any reason the officer proposes, saying for following reasons I'm wanting to do the reassessment, it is not sufficient if the commissioner says, yes, I am satisfied with this and I am giving approval. No. He has to at least subjectively write a couple of lines saying on what basis he is agreeing that he has perused the information. A mechanical signing off saying, yes, you can proceed will not suffice. Such a thing will fail the concept of prior approval and the sanction as mandated in section 151. So the approval, because now that you are gone away from reason to believe, it is on the information that you are saying, and you have two limbs with it. Under 148, they talk about this, the suggestive info, what we can call it as saying, suggestive info for income escaping assessment. Any information flagged in the case of necessity for the relevant assessment year in accordance with the risk management strategy formulated by the board from time to time. That is one limb of the information which suggests. Second limb is any final objection raised by C&AG to the effect that the assessment in the case of necessity for the relevant assessment year has not been made in accordance with the provisions of the Act. So these are two limbs under the explanation 1 to section 148, which deals with, for the purpose of 148, that is for issue of notice under for income escaping assessment, and 148A, the procedural limb for conducting an inquiry, providing opportunity, etc. This is the information. And why is this important now? Whether this is akin to any normal information available within our records may not be, because they have said information flagged in the case of an SSC for the relevant assessment year in accordance with the risk management strategy formulated with the board. Keeping in mind how the assessments are progressing now, from e-assessment, we have moved to now faceless assessment. From e-appeals under CAD appeals, we have moved to faceless appeals. Tribunal appeals are in the process of being made faceless because the relevant effect has not been given to, the scheme has not been rolled out. Under 255(7), they said that it will become faceless, but scheme has not come. We'll discuss it a little later as to the practical issues involved in making a tribunal faceless. So, once you say that it has to be flagged off in the case of SSC, which means we know that it is without human intervention based on algorithms that the system would probably decide, and the risk management strategy by the board. If that information is flagged off, then it amounts to, for the purpose of 148 and 148A, the information with the assessing officer which suggests that income escape assessment is these two. Where it should have been flagged off in accordance with the risk management strategy. I don't think the risk management strategy as such will be a public domain. There are different parameters. Okay, at least they should come out with certain guidelines for scrutiny selection on a manual basis. Apart from the computer assisted scrutiny selection or the CAS, you had cases where the commissioners would manually select cases based on certain criteria. Bad debts more than 50 lakhs. Loss exceeding so much. Or previous year additions paid exceeding specified amount, it may be 50 lakhs, 1 crore as the case may be. Or 2 assessment years after the survey takes place. Or 2 assessment years after the 6 years of mandatory assessment and research takes place. They could have defined the criteria and picked up cases for selection. Now, which is not the case. The officer is duty bound under these particular provisions only, under explanation 1 to 148, that these are the 2 things which suggest that the income has escaped assessment. You have the second explanation to 148, which deals with the search and survey provisions. One important facet that I have to bring it to notice is the concept of assessments under 153A to 153C, read with 153, which was there for search assessments, now no longer is applicable from 1st April 2021. There encompass the search assessments also within 148 itself, wherein in case of a search after the 1st April 2021 or survey after 1st April 2021, the officer is satisfied with the prior approval of commissioner or joint principal commissioner, commissioner, and any money, bullion, article thing, requisition in the case of after 1st April belongs to the SSC, or the officer is satisfied again with the approval. So the approval of principal commissioner or commissioner now is in multiple places. This is to ensure that checks and balances are there, that the officers cannot act on their own whims and fancies to reopen cases. At every point in time, there is a checks and balances to ensure that the discretionary power available to the assessing officer is in due check. Saying that yes, they cannot be permitted to conduct affairs in the manner that they deem fit, but it has to be in accordance with the law. Therefore, the approval is assuming large significance in the revamped 148. Now, this link, what I'm talking about now, to satisfy this search after 1st April, survey after 1st April, or the officer he believes that that books, bullion, jewelry is in a particular place, belongs to the SSC, then in those situations, the assessing officer should be deemed to have information which suggests that the income chargeable to tax in the case of SSC is escaped assessment. Which means, in these situations, what I just mentioned, in case of search survey, and also with bullion, jewelry, or article or thing, which belongs to the SSC, then you need not go back to explanation 1 to say whether the information is flagged off in the case of an SSC. No, because that is based on tangible facts that the system should have flagged off. Here it is deemed, which is deemed suggestive information. that whether or not the risk management strategy of the board talks about this, if you are falling under the categories enumerated in explanation 2 to section 148, it is deemed that the income has escaped assessment. So, the concept of recording of satisfaction under 153C in case of an assessment of a person other than a person search, documents found in the case of other than a search person, those issues now get mitigated. Because if you read the memorandum to the finance bill, they mention that the revamp 153 to 153C, which came in from 2003 onwards, from 1st June 2003, were not successful for the revenue because they have lost many cases on those counts because it laid due emphasis on how the officers conduct an assessment, the approvals, the satisfaction note, etc., etc. So on procedural aspects, which the law was very clear, and the Supreme Court has upheld those provisions, department has lost many cases. One of them is that, which resulted in amendment in 2017 itself. The classic question was whether the appellate authorities are empowered to look into the validity of such. That was the question before the Karnataka High Court in the case of Ramai Reddy, 339 FTR 210. It's a landmark judgment insofar as such is concerned, more so in the state of Karnataka. Karnataka High Court held that the appellate authorities are empowered to look into the validity of such. In that case, it was a 158 BCPD case. The appeal directly led to the tribunal. There was no appeal to the Commission of Appeals in case of block assessment. That was the period before 31st May 2003. The appeal was directly to the tribunal. So the High Court said the appellate authority is empowered to look into. Then Supreme Court in SD Aluminium came in and said, yes, look, the Commission of Appeals can look into the validity of such. What did it flag off for the department? Commissioner of Appeals is in administrative hierarchy a lower level officer compared to the Principal Commissioner, Principal Director of Income Tax who would have authorized research, which means a junior officer was empowered by virtue of Supreme Court judgment in SD Aluminium to look into whether his superior officer authorized research was valid or not. So, which means junior officer will be sitting in judgment whether his administratively superior officer did his duty properly or not. And the reasons recorded had to be now, reasons for search had to be shown to the appellate authority, which was tribunal also. Then by Finance Act 2017, they brought about an explanation to say the reason to believe or reason to suspect, as the case may be, need not be furnished to any income tax authority, including the income tax appellate tribunal. So they nullified most of these judgments by bringing in a legislative amendment to say that it will not be provided. But cleverly they kept the courts out of it because you cannot say that it cannot be shown to the court also. Because in the writ jurisdiction, if you challenge the perversity of the search itself and the legality of it, and if you are able to demonstrate it, the court still has got the powers to call for the information and look into the documents or the satisfaction note which authorize the search. Now those things probably come to a standstill because they have removed the search assessment from 153A to 153C and brought them within the ambit of 148 itself. So what does this do? Whether are you reducing in litigation here? To a certain extent, in terms of procedural requirements of in a search assessment, the mandatory condition was any assessment order being passed under 153A or 153C ought to have been approved by the Joint Commission or the Additional Commission under 153D of the Act. And even that approval there, the courts were very clear, it is not a mechanical approval. It had to be after due consideration of the facts. The Joint Commissioner was supposed to look into the draft order of the assessing officer, on what basis he come to the conclusions, then be satisfied personally that yes, this is a fit case for completing the assessment in the manner that the officer has proposed, and then forward the file with his comment. Now, such a thing here is not there because it comes into 148. Now, how many years will you reopen? Earlier under 148, you had two limbs first within up to 4 years, nothing required. Beyond 4, up to 6 years, with prior approval of commission was there. In case of a financial asset located outside India, you had 16 years. That 16-year criteria now has been done away with. Now there are only two limbs. That is 3 years primarily. It is primarily 3 years and up to 10 years in case of the such and these provisions. However, there is also a saving clause wherein if on 1/4/2021, by that time, say by 31st March 2021, if for any of the assessment years, if you could not have issued a notice under the earlier 148, now it is 10 years. Take an example, on 31/3/2021, you could not have issued a notice for year ended March 2013. You could have issued for 2014, but you could not have issued for 2013. But if the new provision comes into effect on 1st April 2021, you can go back 10 years, which means you can issue for 13 ending, 12 ending, 11 ending also. That has been again curtailed by saying that if on 31/3/2021, before this provision comes into effect, if certain years could not have been reopened under 148, by using the new provisions now, we cannot reopen them. That's a welcome move because otherwise, you would have enlarged the scope of the section retrospectively. Because when the transaction was entered into, the SSC knew it's a 6-year reopening period or 7-year reopening period. 7 years in the sense that year plus 6 years. Now, you go back and say reopen. So that clarity has been given. There's a saving clause here to say that that cannot be done with. And how does this process of 3 years happen? Under 151 for sanction, who will sanction? Principal Commissioner or Principal Director or Commissioner Director. If 3 years or less than 3 years have elapsed, then these authorities, Principal Chief Commissioner or Principal Director General, if more than 3 years have elapsed. So again, for sanctioning also, the hierarchy is clear. 3 and less than 3, a particular cadre of officers. More than 3, it's a different set of officers, which means each higher level officer is being bestowed with a sense of responsibility, I would say, to mean that the assessments which are being framed under this new sections should pass the rigors of the new 148, 148A. Because what is, now we'll come back to 148A, now that we have understood the tenets of how this reassessment is working and what is this information, suggestive information and deemed suggestive information for income escaping assessment. What is the limits under 148A? What have they done? As I explained earlier, the Supreme Court in GK and Drive Charts laid out certain procedural requirements as to how an assessment under 148 will be conducted. They have incorporated or borrowed the substance of the judgment by bringing in 148A, where they say, before issuing notice, he shall conduct an inquiry. That inquiry has to be with the prior approval, which means the superior officer will know what his subordinate is up to. Next, provided opportunity of being heard to the SSC with the prior approval of the specified authority by serving upon a show cause notice from the indirect taxes. It's a show cause notice scheme is prevalent. Well, before the actual notice, you get a show cause notice, and then after the show cause, it results in the notice. Similar thing they brought in 148A here. Instead of a straight away 148 and assistant proceedings commencing, under 148A, he will issue a show cause notice to you, giving you time of not less than 7 days, but less than 30 days to provide your objections, or such other time which you may seek extension and adjournment as the case may be. Bringing out saying, this is the information I have got. Now you tell me why I should not proceed with the assessment. So this concept of him directly issuing a notice, you filing return, then asking for reasons, then you filing objections, him passing speaking order, then you are rejoinder, done away with. Before the notice, he should show cause, because he has the information with him. the system has flagged off. And on has CNAG, final objection by CNAG, he will issue a show cause to you. You are supposed to respond to it, explain in detail the facts to say why an assessment need not be conducted on the assessee for the on particular flags. Then he is supposed to consider the reply what you have filed, which even if it doesn't form part of the section, it is deemed that when you are initiating any proceeding and if somebody has filed a reply to the notice, you are duty bound to consider the reply before you dispose it off. Then the clause D, what I spoke about earlier, decide on the basis of material available on record, including the reply of the assessee, whether or not it is a fit case for issuance of notice under 148. Again, by passing an order with the prior approval of specified authority, which means even here, before he confirms his action of coming to a conclusion that yes, this is a fit case for issuance of notice under 148. After conducting the inquiry, giving opportunity to the assessee, considering his reply, then arriving at his own conclusion, even that is subject to the approval of the specified authority, which means at every stage there is a check on the actions of the assessing officer. In one way, it's a welcome move because at no stage that there can be a whimsical method of framing assessment saying I will issue the notice without considering your objections, or I would consider objections differently than what you communicated to me. Now the burden also will be equally on the commissioner or the principal commissioner who is going to approve it. Because it's not a straight case where I'm issuing the notice whether there is approval. No. There's a lot of groundwork which has happened for this. And based on this, he will pass the order, and then he goes on to 148 and then issues a notice, which is why in 148 I adopts saying that before making an assessment and subject to 148A, because 148A has laid down conditions as to what he must do before that, then issue the notice, requiring him to furnish in such period as specified in such notice a return of income. So the return of income now comes much later. After the exhausting show cause notice and your objections, then you will file the return. So by then you would have known whether you are able to come out of this troubled reassessment proceedings or you are supposed to agree. If you are in agreement with what the officer is proposed, you will probably file a return of income, incorporating that income which the officer felt that or information is suggested to him that income was escaping assessment, and the proceedings will go on. And it's not necessary that you will accept it also. You may still dispute it despite officer issuing a notice to you, and it's like any other regular proceeding from that point in time. You will file a return. There is again no question of reasons and approval. All those procedural aspects have been taken care of before the issuance of notice. Once the notice is issued and you file the return, the regular assessment proceedings commences. But this also may become part of the faceless thing. All these procedural aspects, what probably we have discussed in the last 15 to 20 minutes, will be subject to it being carried out under faceless mechanism only, because everything is E. Because it is information which is flagged off in the case of assessment, because to my understanding, there may not be a human intervention in flagging that information. It will be probably a predetermined set of questions which will be fed saying, and all of you are aware as to how the returns of income are being integrated with different provisions now, not only and different statutes, not only with the Information from Companies Act, even from GST portal, the information is available in 26 years now. So, for all those discrepancies which may arise due to various factors, that can become the information which suggests that income has escaped assessment, and the system will flag it out. Then look, there is a difference between GST turnover and income tax turnover by 5 crores. The normal course, what would happen? You will issue notice, you will fight it out. No, you will issue show cause notice. You can explain with evidence, saying, look, this is the reason, this was exempt, or which is why income tax turnover is higher. Under GST, this is not taxable, therefore it doesn't form part of the turnover there. You may have 100 such reasons, but you are given an opportunity before the assessment itself to clear the procedural aspects and on the basis of which they are arriving at a conclusion.
There will not be a copy of the reasons.
They will provide that. No? They will provide it. Because under 148A, they will, based on the information, he is going to issue the details to you saying that this is the reason. Provide an opportunity of being heard to the assisted prior approval of authority by serving upon him a notice to show cause within such time as been specified for a number of days. As to why a notice under 148 should not be issued on the basis of information which suggests that income chargeable to tax has escaped assessment. Which means, in the show cause notice itself, he will mention that this is the information I have got. Please show cause as to why it should not be treated as income escaping assessment. So that is the reasons recorded. And because it is information flagged off by the system, now we have to probably expand our understanding for the term information. What constitutes information? Though under 148 explanation 1 in terms of non-search and survey cases, what they are talking about is only property. It must be flagged off in accordance with this final strategy and final objection of the C&A. Whether any information which comes from a different source to the knowledge of the principal commissioner, that an assessee is probably say engaging in trading in these stocks or fake invoices. If such information comes to the knowledge of the officer, which probably the system may not be able to flag it off. We don't know. Maybe the system is not equipped as of now to decide whether based on your return that you're dealing in penny stocks or having fake invoices. If invoices may match, you may be depicting in GST also. What is fake is a different thing. Without, again, 271 AAD penalty is also there saying what will be the penalty for false entries and fake invoices. If such information comes in, whether this will be under clause A, can they bring this? Clause A is that is 3 and less than 3 and for regular cases. How are they going to incorporate that in the show cause notice to say that they have information? Everything is happening electronically, faceless, fine. But somewhere the information will flow to the department. Otherwise, the intelligence wing of the department will have no work. The reason they are going to conduct a search is also the same basis. And every bit of information need not result in a search. So if they conduct a search or survey, then the question of which information they have does not arise because there is a deeming fiction there which says the moment it's a search and survey, it is deemed that officer has got information. But the flip side of this, dealing with how the satisfaction note, if need not be provided in the search, they amended it. Take a case. I'm not saying this will happen. Hypothetical situation. Department can come with a blank warrant to you, blank satisfaction note. They will not come to you based on some information. They'll come and search, find something. You can actually go back and write. Assuming they found 3 diaries. They may go back and write saying you are in lookout for some diaries which had transactions. Nothing prevents them now. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's a possibility. Because there is no evidence to say at what point in time the satisfaction note was recorded. And because that they're not going to give it now. By virtue of amendment 132, by instruction of explanation, they will not give it. Even if the court calls for it, what they will produce is what they will have written. How do you know when it was written? Unless that satisfaction note is also electronically generated or there is a timestamp available to find out as to at what point in time is it generated. If that doesn't happen, the satisfaction note, if it assuming it remains manual, I think department is going to start probably 100 no loss, where vis-a-vis you will be starting with 5 down and 20 overs less. That's how grey the situation will be, because you would not know. And even if you file a writ saying that illegality of such and other things, because they would have found materials, nothing stops them from saying that we went there for this. Earlier, they could not have done that because they might have found 10 diaries with you. They might have come to you for ABC. They might have found PQR. You could have challenged saying there was no information or reason to believe or reason to suspect for them to come to me. Or there is no incriminating material so as to pass the liability on me. Now such a thing does not help now. That is not possible because they have done away with the 153A to 153C provisions, brought it to 148, and they have brought in deeming fiction by which the moment a search or survey is conducted, whether or not they had information that you have income which had escaped assessment or say tax evasion, whatever. It is deemed, so which means if it's deemed that you had information, it is not subject to challenge. You will not be in a position to challenge that action of the assessing officer. Because there were judicial pronouncements, even certain Honorable Karnataka High Court 207/55 wherein they said at the time of assessment, the department has to produce the relevant documents because it is no longer secret, because based on certain information you have done investigation, then done an assessment. Where is the question of you saying you not participated there during assessment? You know the reason on which now all those legal benefits what we have got by virtue of judicial pronouncements, by and large, it's a situation where they come and such, the assessment will mandatorily have to be conducted. Even earlier you had the position of 153 issue notice for 6 years. Now, that you could have challenged there, saying that how you will do, what basis, and however define the time limits for notice now under 149. 149(1)(a), they said 3 years, if 3 years have elapsed from the end of the relevant assessment year, unless the case falls under B. What does the B talk about? This is also by and large there under research provisions wherein, if you remember year number 7 to 10, that is 6 years after issued under 153A, they extended it for year number 7 to year number 10 based on a financial parameter of 50 lakh in aggregate in any of those years. They could have reopened under 153A or 153C for any of those years. That is, year number 7, 8, 9, 10 were there. And we found 50 lakhs in year number 8. They could have reopened only for year number 8. 7, 9, and 10 they might not have done. Similar thing now. If 3 years but not more than 10 years have elapsed from the end of the relevant assessment year, unless the officer has in his possession books of accounts or other documents or evidence. This is what was mentioned in 153 also. He must have books of accounts or other documents or evidence. Now, this term is important, which reveal that the income chargeable to tax. It must reveal that the income chargeable to tax represented in the form of asset which has escaped assessment amounts to or is likely to amount to 50 lakh rupees or more for that year. That's when you can issue for between 3 and 10 years. So here there is a lot of emphasis on the evidence. Books of accounts or other documents or evidence. It is simply not enough. If they say I got books of accounts, so therefore I am issuing. Those documents must reveal that income has escaped assessment or income chargeable tax. Is how income represented in the form of asset. So can we take a hypothetical position that I had some undisclosed income in particular year, it is spent, it is expended, there is no underlying asset. Does 149(1)(b) term time limit, is it not valid at all? And think about it because they say very clearly that it is income chargeable. It must reveal that income chargeable to tax represented in the form of asset. So that is very, very important here. It is not sufficient based on reason to believe, reason to suspect, but the moment they use the term, it must reveal it. In my opinion, it's a wider term, and it means prima facie must be able to come to a conclusion that income escaping assessment is present, and then the notice can be issued for year number 3 after 3 years up to 10 years. And this, as I said earlier, 16-year time limit for financial asset outside India has been done away with because by and large Black Money Act is coming now and there is no time limit there at all. Why have a 16-year limit under 148 and reasons to believe, full and true disclosure, approval, sanction, nothing. Black Money Act, no time limit for transaction for financial assets or foreign assets. Therefore, I think to that extent that brought in here. So under this 148, what happens now? Under this new method, what earlier you would have termed as vague information, you would not now know exactly what sort of information is being in their possession. Because if everything is by the system, definitely you have no case to say that, look, my case need not be picked up excepting on facts. I think in my understanding of this section, on legal positions and fighting on comma, full stop, and interpretation of certain terms, to a large extent has been done away with in this new 148. There is scope, I'm not saying no. Like in the second link I said, it's revealed, those are there. But prima facie for reassessment as such, there is little scope for you fighting it. You don't know what is vague information. The moment it is flagged off, you will say, yes, my system is showing it to me, this is information. You file your request. And practically, I am given to understand that certain faceless assessment are probably resulting in lesser additions. I do not know to what extent it is true, but I'm given to understand that the additions which were being routinely made in the normal cases now are not being made when it is become faceless. Probably any of you have handled many faceless assessments would be in a position to tell me better. Is it happening? Is that right?
Whatever cases,
No additions. Yeah. Which means the litigation is going to reduce. So it is directly impacting to fellows like me. We are aggrieved persons here. You are probably earlier. No, any aggrieved person should file an appeal. We are aggrieved persons if this happens. That if all of officers pass, though at the larger level, macro level, that's a good scheme to go with, wherein they have to pick out only such of those cases where they have to spend actual time to make a good assessment. Now, what was happening? You give 1,000 cases to one officer, and in the last 1 week, he'll be still left with around 850 cases. And he'll call up every case saying, sir, it's time for this money, this one. So, the major ones, he will not be able to devote good amount of time. Now, by probably doing this and bringing in dynamic jurisdiction, the workload of officers across the country is being managed now. Say somebody sitting in Guwahati probably did not have enough files as compared to a DCIT circle, say for example, one in Bangalore, who may have 500 cases. Same DCIT circle one in Guwahati may have 25. Now probably the even distribution of work takes place. It will be good.
So in the second thing, you said 50 lakhs.
Yeah.
50 lakhs is the income, not the tax.
Income chargeable to tax represented in the form of asset amounts to or is likely to amount to 50 lakh rupees or more for that year.
So that's the income. And 50 lakhs is not, it's for the entire 7 years.
For that year, each year. They have not used the word in aggregate. That's it. I'll read it again for the benefit of all because there is no ambiguity. No notice under 148 be issued to the relevant assessment year, clause B, if 3 years, but not more than 10 years have elapsed from the end of the relevant assessment year, unless the assessing officer has in his possession books of accounts or documents or evidence which reveal that the income chargeable to tax represented in the form of asset which has escaped assessment amounts to or is likely to amount to 50 lakh rupees or more for that year. So, classically we know that each year is a separate unit of assessment. Continuing with that understanding of us, but each year it must be there and it is represented in the form of asset.
20 people is represented in the form of asset. So suppose if X amount is spent in the marriage and that is not disclosed, so that is not represented by way of asset. So that nothing can be done to that.
Which is what I brought out saying, in my opinion, this is where there is the, under 153A also, this is the position we had taken earlier, saying that, look, if you are saying it, there must be an asset, and if there is none, will this fail? My understanding as it looks now, if there is no asset, underlying asset, there is no income escaping assessment.
So there is escapement.
Maybe escapement may be a fact, but the fiction created is it must be in the form of an asset. Had it been a simple case wherein if they were able to prove or if the documents revealed that yes, you spent 50 lakh rupees, which is not accounted, which in the normal course is income escaping assessment. Under the erstwhile 148, that could have been income escaping assessment because you have either declared your income to by less than such an extent or expenditure is not properly. Either which way, it was resulting in an income escaping assessment in one of the links under 147. Now, by saying that it is mandatory that you must have asset, one of the views is that unless department is able to establish the existence of an underlying asset, the clause B, that is 149, 1B for issuance of notice for period beyond 3 years. For any of those years, may not really hold good. Though we are in agreement with explanation 2 to 148 to say in such survey and information found, document, bullion, etc. belongs to the SSC. Fine. You have deemed information that income has escaped assessment. There is no problem. We are not doubting that at all. But even this is subject to sanction. Even this particular provision is subject to sanction. It is not saying that if you are search or if you are under falling under search or survey, the principal commissioner or commissioner is not evolving. Who can issue notices specified under? Who is the sanction authority under 151? 3 years, less than 3 years, principal commissioner or principal director or commissioner or director. If more than 3 years, principal chief commissioner or principal director. So who can issue notice? We know. When can they issue? Under 149, 1B time limit. For more than 3 years, up to 10 years, they are saying the existence of income represented in the form of asset is mandatory, which means the earlier figure of 148 of 6 years, now under 148 is now down to 3 years. So mandatory assessment even in such cases will be now only 3 years. As against 6 years in 153 or 153C, now it's going to be only 3 years. Once it is only 3 years, fall under 149 1B, that is from year number 4 to year number 10, my opinion that income represented in the form of asset is mandatory. This they borrowed from 153A only. It was there for year number 7 to 10, but it was there in aggregate. Now it is for each assessment year. So this is by and large the new 148 is modeled down. Probably any issues or any thing you can probably take it up now before I go to the next issue.
Now coming to the 50 lakhs, was an immovable property is purchased say some 7 years back for a cost of say 10 lakhs rupees. Now the value is say 1 crore. Will it not come under this?
Possibly no, because they're saying, what is the dispute? It is only represented in the form of an asset is likely to amount to 50 lakh rupees or more. For that year, what would have escape assessment is only 10 lakhs. In my common sense understanding, if assessment year 16, 17, 17, 3 years, they want to go back. What was the income that is suppressed? It was 10 lakhs. So maybe that may not qualify here for the, this is one of the methods where, in my understanding, they want to reduce the pendency of litigation and have probably a smooth transition into a system where accepting such cases, survey cases, probably black money, international tax cases, the rest I think they want to have it in almost an automatic route. Because if addition is being made on specific information, the chances of you fighting it and defending on facts will become so much more difficult. Excepting in estimation cases, those litigations will continue. Where books are not maintained or maintained and rejected, those will continue. But in majority cases which were being knocked off on legal parameters, that litigation on 148 on legal parameters of reason to believe, full and true disclosure, change of opinion, those things now will not matter. Because there is no option anywhere here to say officer will again come back and do a assessment, because for him to do anything, there must be the sanction, not only of the commissioner or principal commissioner, the system should have flagged it off first. But under the system now to say, saying yes, this is a fit case for flagging off and subsequent show cause notice and reassessment. What happened? And certain other legal provisions like borrowed satisfaction, now we do not know whether they hold good or not. What is borrowed satisfaction? If the assessing officer in, say, Bangalore Circle 11 has reason to believe that income is escaped assessment in the case of A, and he records reasons, and the file is, so then the case is transferred to say ITO 11 Mumbai, and the Mumbai ITO continues the assessment. The law on borrowed satisfaction is that the assessment which is being completed by the officer in Bombay is not valid because he does not have satisfaction that income is escaped assessment. He is relying upon the ITO 11 Bangalore's satisfaction note to say income is escaped assessment, and therefore assessments have been quashed. Rajasthan since 313 ATR 231, and recently Karnataka High Court in GMR holdings 407 ATR 439 was very clear on borrowed satisfaction. Now in the e-assessment and faceless assessment regime, the concept of borrowed satisfaction really may not arise, because we wouldn't know in any case who initially had a satisfaction note and who is now doing it. Probably certain of these legal issues which were there now probably to litigate may not be there, and the fishing inquiries which the courts were coming down heavily on the department saying you cannot issue a notice and then conduct inquiry and then make additions. Now the inquiry power is given before the notice issues a notice itself. Here the problem was he will issue a notice first. Then say you have invested in penny stocks or credit worthiness is not proper. So again it was a matter of fighting, saying whether it was reason to believe, reason to suspect. So those issues now probably will come down to a large extent. Maybe we have to, once the notices start, we hope that they will make some small mistakes. We try to latch onto those mistakes to find out as to where we can come out or wriggle out of this new 148, 148A. We'll see. But as probably as assessments will happen and with time, we will be in a better position to understand as to how this new scheme is going to work. Any further questions on this?
The income is escaped is more than 50 lakhs. Can they reopen the case on 11 and 12 now?
This is what I said. If as on 31st March 2021, if 11-12 could not have been opened, if it, any year, not 11-12 for that matter, if any assessment year, if it could not have been reopened under the erstwhile 148 as on 31st 2021, such a thing cannot be done in new regime. That is proviso to 149(1). They specifically brought about saying that it's very clear. You cannot do that.
Then what is the significance of 10 years now as of from 2020
Going forward,
going forward?
Going
So it
forward.
takes another period, 4 years.
4 years, no? Because what happens now, as we speak on 31/3/2021, 2014 was covered. So you could have issued up till
Yeah.
14. Now, 14 to 21, anyway, 7 years are already there. In 3 years' time, we'll reach 10 years.
10 years.
In 3 years' time, we'll reach 10 years because as of 31/3/2021, notice for 31/3/2014 could have been issued, which means as of 31/3/2024, notice for 31/3/2014 can be issued. So the intervening period, that's all. Now, 13, 12, and 11, which cannot be done, are permanently out.
Done.
That's all. Even government is also looking at reducing litigation and trying to mop up the bill, which is why the Vivad Se Vishwas came in, and it's been it's a phenomenal success, but good success rate because apparently 30% of the cases have been settled. It's a good number, and I think about 1.5 lakh cases have been settled. So, as and when the small disputes have been resolved, we'll be left with fewer number of disputes, and the officers will be able to concentrate better. And they also want to bring functional specialization within the officers to deal with particular issues. It was not happening earlier. The officers used to have international tax, not international tax, but under the regular businesses, different type of companies, IT companies, manufacturing, pharma, liquor, granite, everything. Going forward, maybe they'll a lot based on functional specialization. So, step in the direction where department also will not lose out on items which they ought to have checked in the assessment, but it is going unnoticed due to the lack of specific functional authority of the officers, which now will not happen.
Notice for assessment year 15-16 is issued.
Yeah.
So on the notice date is 31st of March. But it's received by email on 1st of April. Is it a valid notice?
If it's 15-16, it's valid. No?
13-14 is then questionable.
Yeah, but you have received it on 1st of April
By email.
by email.
Physical copy not received.
No.
Okay.
Is it a valid notice?
No, it's the year ended 31/3/2015. So it falls within the realm of 6 years. Because there was a case falling beyond 4 years, it is 4 years, but not less than 6 years have elapsed. So then you have to take a position saying the notice could not have been issued because the earlier provision specifically uses the term no action under 147 shall be undertaken beyond the expiry of 4 years. That is one of the terminologies used. But if it's beyond 4 years and if the principal, if the commission has approved it up till 6 years and only the 1 lakh income criteria is there, I don't see a reason why.
Why would this question be? We have received on 1st of April. So the service of police is important or the receipt of like issue of
Insofar as notice is concerned, it must leave one thing is, it must leave the control of the department. And because it is email on 1st April, it is definitely 1st April only.
So my question is regarding that.
It is 1st April only. The date of service is 1st April only. It could not have been said like earlier that it was dispatched on 31st, notice was signed, and the law which stood for physical notice was that it must leave the control of the department. The moment it is given to the postal department, there can be a normal delay of a week or 10 days, 15 days for you to get the notice. That was valid because it was on 31st dated and left the control of the department. Here, it is not left the control of the department on 31st March. I have prepared a particular notice, but it is left my control only on 1st April. And if the conditions specified in the SY 147 are not satisfied, you always find out the notice saying that it is barred by limitation. Nothing stops you from finding it as barred by limitation on the condition that more than 4 years and less than 6 years are elapsed and the sanction and those issues will come up. And also, trying to interpret the word to say no action under 147 can be undertaken after expiry of 4 years, excepting if you fall under the other category that can be used.
This whole will provided you are not receiving a hard copy.
Yes, receive the hard copy by post, which means you have to do the speed post tracker. And the moment you get in the speed post, you can punch in the number and it will show when the post office received the document. If the post office received it on 1st April, file it saying that it is bad mail limitation. But then they can't give a reason saying I gave it to my dispatch clerk. It is within the department. It is within the department. So what is within the department, they cannot say that it is left by control. There are contrary case laws to say that if it leaves the officer's control and goes to the dispatch section, it is beyond the officer. Those questions still remain. So because looking at how now the courts are looking at it, they are not getting onto so much technicalities. Ultimately, they are saying, fine, there is in your control or not in your control. So close to 7:30 is it? 7:15, okay, 45 minutes. There is one section has taken about 1 hour 10 minutes because there is a new one. Next we will take certain issues in search. One general question which arises most times during search is whether a search can be conducted based on a transaction recorded in the books of accounts. I'm not getting on the legalities of warrant satisfaction, no. It is already a transaction recorded in the books of accounts. Can a search be conducted on that? Any views? The basis for search can it be a transaction recorded in the books of accounts?
Based on suspected cases.
No, it is recorded in the books of accounts. What happens is, on 132, look at the condition as to under 132(1) ABC that you will not satisfy gold bullion jewelry is found, you're likely not to appear for summons, or you're likely not to respond to 142(1). Only then they will search you. That's a basic premise of 132(1) ABC. If there is none of these things are existing, they come and search you and say, there's a transaction in the books of accounts, this is why I came to you. Even that ground, the search may not be valid. But one more important thing is, the search can be valid or invalid is one thing, assuming the search is illegal. Documents found in an illegal search can be used against the assessee. There is no law that says it's illegal search, therefore documents can't be used. Fine. The search may be illegal, fine. You challenged it on perversity and other things. Assuming the court quashes the search as invalid or illegal and quashes it. The information gathered in documents and evidence which the department comes into the position during that illegal search also can be used against assessing for subsequent proceedings. And they can issue 148 saying that income has escaped assessment. What is the reason? This is the document found. Then you cannot say it's illegal search. Search is illegal. Whether the document is illegal, no, document is not illegal. Pooranmal versus CAG 93 ADR 505 Supreme Court said that document found in illegal search can be used against SSA subject to the provisions which exist. If the notice can be issued, can you issue it and take it forward? So therefore, we plainly cannot come to a conclusion that because they will have different ways and means to say, but plainly, academically, if you say there's no other conditions are getting satisfied, but the search only based on transaction in the books of accounts, general understanding will be that the search is not valid, but we should be able to prove that none of the other conditions exist and nothing is found. Otherwise, what is found will be depicted as what they came for. In the present law, they find 70,000 grams of jewelry. Is very well within their right to say, I knew that there is jewelry, which is why I came. Because in the new law, it is is deemed that officer is information about income chargeable to tax escaping assessment. Therefore, the new law and the earlier one, we have to probably look at it a little more carefully. And on warrant, whether more than one officer can be authorized to conduct the search. Because if you look at the format and the warrant and notice issue, can more than one officer be permitted? Though it says that the principal director is authorizing A to search a particular premises. A lot of people may be assisting it. Assuming it is mentioned A, B, both to do a particular search, it does not invalidate the search at all. Procedurally, technically, they might have been wrong on the department's procedure itself. That the commissioner will authorize one person to search with a lot of them assisting. Just because he is authorized more than one officer does not mean the search again is illegal. The search will be valid. It's a mere procedural irregularity, not going to the root of the matter. If it's a jurisdictional defect, the search would be void ab initio. It's a procedural irregularity which can be cured. The search cannot be termed as illegal or invalid. And what happens in case of joint warrant? There was controversy. Various high courts, Allahabad High Court, in the case of Vandana Verma 330 APR, and Karnataka High Court in PG Kumar and held that joint warrants cannot be issued, saying that such Ravindra Kore and Prashant GS warrant in the names of both of them. It's different whatever addresses. Court said it is not valid. Law again was amended retrospectively to say, no, even if the warrant mentions more than one name, such is. But it was the law which existed was that they could not have done it. But they've gone and amended it with retrospective effect. So, lot of judgments like this have been annulled by specific legislative amendments retrospectively. Whichever date the provision came in for warrant, they amended from 1st October 1975, something say, deemed that the warrant could have been issued in joint claims. Will still continue to find the different facets. Now, as I told you in the beginning, on the validity of such, what are they said now in the explanation to 132? The reasons to believe or reason to suspect as recorded by the authority need not be disclosed to anybody, including tribunal, which means you are not saying, give me the exact reasons, just identify for me. The explanation using the words, the reasons as recorded by the authority need not be shown. Don't give me the exact reasons, give me the gist of it. The other facets of such being warrant, authorization, provision specific, location specific, panchanama, witness, all those things still continue in validity of such. Validity of such is not merely on one facet of the satisfaction note. Satisfaction note is probably one of the most important ingredients, but the others also form a equally formidable items individually also to challenge a particular action. But now what is happening? By and large, if you look at litigations on such, it will be challenged. But most cases, the cases are being argued on merits. You will have a challenge to the jurisdiction, but we continue. This particular amendment, which has been made in Finance Act 2017, that the reasons will not be shown to the tribunal also, has been the constitutional validity of that has been challenged before the Karnataka High Court and is pending adjudication. It is not been heard. You never know. If probably the SSCs have a good day, maybe the Honorable High Court may concur with the SSCs that that particular amendment is not constitutionally valid. But as history suggests, by and large, on these type of matters, courts generally tend to uphold constitutional validity rather than strike it down. For example, I think today or yesterday a case has got reported by Supreme Court in Pepsi Foods, wherein Supreme Court has negated the revenues argument. What was the position? They said ITAT has no power to extend the stay beyond 365 days, even if the delay was not attributable to SSC. Which means department, it's a stay-related matter, SSC is ready to argue, department takes time, does not argue the matter, and stay expires. Department's contention was tribunal has no power to extend beyond 365 days, therefore we can recover the money. Supreme Court said it is, this particular judgment has to be struck down, or probably has to be reversed, because this is a total travesty of justice if you say that without SSC's fault, he is ready to argue the matter, his obtained state is ready to argue, and for no fault of his, he was saying that I will recover the money. So therefore, when it comes to the fundamental rights which are being affected or a perverse order is being passed, courts will generally come to the rescue. But maybe in my opinion, I may be wrong also, the courts will generally tend to uphold the constitutional validity of such a provision. In ITA, it is stated again, the rights of the SSC were getting affected directly there. Say, no fault of his is being found as a defaulter and they wanted to recover the arrears of tax, saying ITA has no power. Supreme Court has come down heavily on that, 50 foots. It's a good judgment. So therefore, we have to look at each facet as to how probably the courts also will understand. We fighting a particular issue on one side, but how probably the courts will look at it and what is the end result that we are looking at. Is it closing of a case or continuing with the litigation? Depending on that, positions can be taken. And one cardinal principle is that it's settled now that notice cannot be issued in the name of a dead person. I don't think anybody has got a doubt on that. Extend that to a warrant. Warrant was issued in the name of Mr. A. By then he was deceased, which information department does not have. They come to search, they find legal hair, they find the premises, they found. Even then, because the warrant itself was in the name of a dead person, the subsequent proceedings are invalid. Because the law is very clear that the legal heirs are not bound to inform the department saying so and so is not. It is department to find out before issuing a notice. I am not duty bound to inform. Maybe it's a good subaltern if I inform and if still the mistake, it is their fault. Even otherwise, even if I have not informed them, the warrant also issued in the name of a dead person is not valid. You can extend it to amalgamation, demerger also, where one of the company ceases to exist. The notice on the erstwhile company will not be, to be valid. Supreme Court in Maruti Suzuki, 416 ITR 613. Similar analogy, wherein if the warrant is on a dead person, it cannot be proceeded with. The subsequent Panchanama, so the recording of statement, everything is void. But the information that they gather, they can use it subsequently to issue a notice to the legal heir based on information. That's fine. But we're understanding theoretically as to this particular action cannot be resorted to in the normal course. Then one more important facet is admission during the search. Most of you would have encountered a situation where during the search, statement is recorded and the assessee admits to certain income, additional income. Whether such a declaration by the assessee during the recording of statement is sacrosanct. He might have agreed to 101 things. Is it sacrosanct? Is it subject to change? Can you modify it? Or can you totally retract it? The answer is yes. Because the landmark judgment of Supreme Court in Pulangoda Rubber Produce Company, 91 ITR page number 80, Supreme Court said that an admission is an extremely important piece of evidence, but it is for the person who has made the admission to prove the contrary based on evidence. So therefore, merely because the assessee has admitted to certain things in the statement does not mean he has to be bound by it. If you're able to establish with evidence that the statement was on mistaken notion of fact or law or evidence, whatever, you will be able to come out of it. It's not the department is going to accept it. There are two ways. One, by a specific interaction when you file a letter, saying this is what I admitted, this is wrong on so many counts, and you place the evidence. What is a deemed retraction? When you file the return subsequent to the search and recording of statement, and you admitted certain income, you will not include that income in the return of income filing. As on the date of filing of the return of income subsequent to the search and recording of statements, if you don't include that income what you have agreed in the course of search, in my opinion, it amounts to deemed retraction on that day. Saying, look, I might have admitted, but it's retracted by virtue of my return. So, as on the filing of return of income, it becomes a deemed retraction. It does not preclude the assessing officer from considering it. He is duty bound, empowered to consider your statement originally, unless you are able to prove contrary with evidence. It's not that in every case you retract and courts will be like, no. 9 out of 10 cases, you will have to, from 11 out of 10 you have to get across, that courts will not favor retraction so easily, unless you demonstrate that it is within reasonable amount of time, it is actually a mistaken notion of law and fact, or you prove it with evidence. For example, you would have agreed saying, okay, a particular creditor is time barred, I am going to offer that as income under 41. Then you actually make the payment to the creditor. Creditor appears and gives his statement. Those things, because you are demonstrating with tangible evidence, that is one side. The other side, where you would have agreed saying, I agree to offer 10 crore, 5 crore, 20 crore, said those things, unless you are demonstrate that you are not in a proper frame of mind at the time of recording of the statement. Again, you have to prove with evidence that what you stated in the statement is not correct. Only then your argument of statement being recorded in odd hours will be accepted. Though in certain cases, Supreme Court has also said that right to sleep is also akin to a fundamental right and you should be allowed to sleep. Fine. But you should be again able to demonstrate. Assuming they found 5 kgs of gold and you record a statement at 3 a.m. saying, yes, this is not offered to tax earlier. And tomorrow say that I offered at 3 a.m. Fine, you offered at 3 a.m. What is the answer at 8 a.m. for that? The gold is found. Will your answer change? So, when you have to even counter the department, you should be very clear as to on what basis you are countering. Merely because it's statement recorded at 3 a.m. does not make the declaration invalid. At most, you can say, probably I was not in the frame of mind to recollect whether it's disclosed in my book, History of Books, brother, father, sister. I will give reconciliation is one way. To that extent, you will be able to justify it. But can you say that what was found itself is not proper? Or not yours? Then you again have to demonstrate whom does it belong to, the issued owner, why was it with you? So the, what do you say, the train moves on. It's not an easy situation to say, I would declare something and then retract so easily. Next, we get on to certain issues in survey. First thing we'll do is, not many are aware that during a course of survey, statement cannot be recorded on oath. In as such, oath will be administered. The statement under 132(4) will be, the oath will be administered and then taken. But if during a survey, if a statement is recorded after administering oath, such statement is not valid because 133(a) does not empower the officers to record a statement on oath. And this has been applied by the Supreme Court also in 352 IDR 480 other counts. But now what happens? This statement does not have any evidentiary value. Fine. Admission cannot be the basis for making the condition. But if you yourself given out certain facets, saying this is undisclosed income or I have not offered this to tax, dehards the statement, they know that. So from your books of accounts, they will ask you a question next day. My virtue of 142 saying, kindly explain this. So why I'm telling this case law also is, on the legal side, we have certain benefits as to what they cannot do. But practically what happens? Fine, the statement is invalid. But does it stop him from asking the question separately? Oath is not administered. He can record it in a simple question and answer format. Nothing stops him. One other issue is who has to record inventory during survey? Generally, the inspectors do it. Generally. I'm not saying in all cases because the department's procedure manual also does not permit an inspector to do inventory. They can be permitted to be a part of it. The often I know somebody has to do it. If you challenge it somewhere, are you really going to get the benefit? Fine, there is law, there is a case law, you will fight. But what is the effect on the addition which is being made? Okay, he should not have taken inventory, it's taken. You may dispute the value, mode, method, something, but the correction will still with the department. In most cases, we will. There are case laws that say that because it is done by so you cannot rely upon the statement by the inspector. So all based on factual foundations have been built up on the case. That part that can be taken up as the law to say this is done, you're going to succeed. No. Maybe what the inspector says is correct, assuming he's followed all parameters. The only clause is that the wrong person has done the statement. Okay, wrong. But still, does it absolve you of the liability to explain the difference in stock or excess pound or shortage? It doesn't absolve you of the liability. You're supposed to still explain. Maybe the methodology adopted by the inspector is wrong. Fine, fair enough. Therefore, before picking out on legal issues and loopholes, you must ourselves first be very clear, saying to what extent are we going to succeed in this particular line of argument. Initially, to keep the department on tender hooks and on the back foot, yes, these are all good defenses available. But ultimately, in the closure of assessment, we will play a little differently, is what I feel. Theoretically, you will have a lot more case law, lot more issues that can give you saying do this, do it, but on the ground, this will differ from how it happens. But it's important for us to know that these are the benefits available. If you want to take such positions, you can take. There are people who have taken in the past, have succeeded also. So being aware is one thing, trying to follow it in every case is another. Now I leave it to the best discretion of the practicing professionals to decide as to on what basis they will want to go ahead. Any specific issues on survey? Legal issues or anything? We take up revision. 263. We can broadly talk about 263 as before 1/6/2015 and post 1/6/2015. Why is this important? They brought about amendment in 2015. Because the terms used in 263 was erroneous and prejudicial. Many conditions had to be satisfied for a commissioner to revise. And what was erroneous and what was prejudicial, again, it was a matter of controversy in almost all the cases. And probably 7 out of 10 associates were successful in getting the 263 portion, saying it was not erroneous or prejudicial. Both community not satisfied. If improper inquiry was conducted, it does not amount to erroneous prejudicial. He has applied his mind. Improper application of mind does not mean. So they amended 263 by giving an explanation saying, even if the officer has not done something properly, which he ought to have done, this is deemed that it is erroneous and prejudicial. Therefore, like you brought about in 148, the deemed suggestive info, they brought this under 263 5 years ago itself, saying that certain activities which the AO ought to have done with due application of mind, even if he has not done, the commissioner can choose to revise the order because now it is deemed that it is erroneous and prejudicial to the revenue. So what happens? Lot of issues are erstwhile arising in 263 as to whether the mandatory condition is satisfied, whether the twin conditions are satisfied, whether the AO has applied his mind, and AO after application of mind, assuming they discussed it in assessment proceedings and then dropped the particular issue. You could not have said that because it was amounting to taking a view by the officer, which means there is application of mind. Just because the commission has got a different view does not mean the order was erroneous and prejudicial to the interest of the revenue. Therefore, all those sort of positions which are prevalent, they done away with by inserting an explanation with effect from 1/6/2015, wherein for such of those revisions carried out after the 1/6/2015, the legal defenses available erstwhile and the proper inquiry, inadequate inquiry. The law was that inadequate inquiry does not mean it is erroneous prejudicial. He's done something. He should have done more. It's again a relative or subjective matter. How much he should have verified. Has he verified? Yes. Has he verified enough? The commissioner feels no. The law was, courts were holding it that inadequate inquiry cannot be erroneous and prejudicial. If it's complete lack of inquiry, then probably you would have taken up the issue. So, and also, the show cause issuance of whether show cause notice of mandatory, Supreme Court in Amitabh Bachchan's case said that issuance of show cause notice is not fatal to the proceedings. Ultimately, it has listed out the reasons for taking up the case for revision. Supreme Court said that valid proposition. So, by and large, what happens is they taper down the law in such a manner that even the mistakes committed by the department now, you cannot take benefit of that. It is again going to benefit department only. Even if he makes a mistake, you cannot get away. It is deemed that he has applied his mind and they can reopen. So to that extent, we will probably, the litigation coming down is one thing, but the defense mechanism available also gets reduced to that extent in 263. Because by and large, the practical experience in fighting in tribunal, mostly what happens, say 8 out of 10 cases, they will first hear about the merits and then probably go to the legal issue. Not that they are doing something wrong, but the emphasis for the quacking of the revision itself is probably a little lower. Yes, it's not that it's not been done at all, but the number of cases that they would want to quack vis-a-vis, look at the merits also in deciding whether the condition is satisfied or not is probably on a higher proposition. Next, we'll take up one issue of 271AA-D, penalty for fake invoices, false entry or omission of any entry. This probably is a little draconian. This particular provision, because what have they done? You have two elements in this. One is false entry. The second is or omission of any entry which is relevant for computation of total income of such person to evade tax liability. And they have defined what will be false entry. Will include user intention to use forged or falsified documents, that is your fake invoices. Invoices without actual supply of goods or services. Invoices from a person who does not exist. This probably came in after GST kicked in and they found that fake invoices were a menace in curbing GST. The position income tax they were quite easy. It is offered, it is declared as sales, Purchases are declared, payments have been made, payments have been received. How can you say it is false? Now, one is false entry. Next is false entry, at least we understand that yes, it is being done with a motive to evade only. Because they specifically said it is forged documents, invoices without actual supply of goods, invoices from non-existent persons. But the omission of any entry which is relevant for computation of total income of such person to get, and who can be liable also? Because they also had a section where chartered accountants were liable if 271G or something when they brought about penalty for chartered accountants. If you are part and advising that and you come across the entries, it can also be penalized. So it becomes a little draconian because there can be two limbs in false entries. One is a false entry which without supply, which has no impact on computation of income. Then what happens? Take a case wherein you have a entry boosting up sales. You are not evading tax liability there. In fact, you will be paying more, but you come under the false entry. You are not evading tax liability there. In fact, you are showing more income, paying more taxes, obviously. But you come under the first thing which is false entry. False entry you are penalized. Or omission, which is relevant for computation of total income to evade tax liability. So on both counts you will get caught. So you have to be very careful. And one other important thing is, in general any penalty proceeding will have something called subject to a reasonable cause. Penalty at the discretion officer, if you have a reasonable cause, penalty ought to be dropped is the common understanding. But the reference to 273B here, the section which gives immunity from penalty from any sections, if you assuming you have a reasonable cause, 271 AAD is missing from the list under 273B, which means you may be in a position that it is a genuine situation, you are able to explain it thoroughly, even then the reasonable clause will not help you because 273B is not considered, 273B does not take into account the reasonable cause for issues under 271 AAD. That becomes even more imperative that it's going to have a lot of damage because it will be faceless assessments and it is seamless sharing of information with CBSE and CBDT now. On real time, the information is getting shared. So, whether will you have the opportunity to explain that yours was not a false entry? Whether one person agrees that he is doing an entry, the other person will not accept. Who is right, who is wrong? There has to be evidence. It is why we go back to cross-examination. Cardinal rule is if any statement or evidence is being used against the SSE, first statement of information, we go back to Kishin Chalala 125 ITS 713 when the Supreme Court said, if any information is used by the department against the SSE, the department is duty bound to furnish that information to the SSE for rebuttal. Failing to do which renders the proceedings bad in law. And if you are relying upon statements of third parties, say take invoice cases, one person admits saying I have done a fraud and given some fake invoices. He may be right, he may be wrong. Maybe for different reasons he might have agreed. Whether he is right or wrong is, keep it aside for a moment. What are the rights of the person on whom the statement is being used? He has a right to cross-examine the party whose statement is being used against him. Again, cross-examination is not an absolute right. You are supposed to specifically, in writing, ask or probably during the course of assessment, in writing. Now that you will not be facing the AO to make a mention in the order sheet. We are so much used to saying, okay, not in writing, but during assessment in the officer records in the order sheet. Now the recording of the order sheet is not there. So you will have to request in writing through your submission saying, I want to cross-examine so and so person because you're using the statement of a third party against me. And once you have sought for a cross-examination, the officer is duty bound to provide it. Firstly, he has provided a statement to you. And you can obviously have your reply to that statement saying why it is wrong and erroneous on various grounds. You have once you have sought for a cross-examination, department is duty bound to give it to you. Andaman Timber 127 DTR, Supreme Court is very clear that if you seek for a cross-examination, a particular witness, you are duty bound to get it. Department cannot refuse to say, if you know the statement. No, you don't know what situations the statement was taken. When you cross-examine, you will be able to talk more. Now the practical side of it now, because it is faceless, how will they give you the cross-examination? And cross-examination in video conferencing may not be really helpful because generally it's the body language and a lot of other traits which are the major giveaways in cross-examination. The video conferencing, we don't know how we are able to put across and find out, but probably that's how it's going to happen because if they're doing it from jails for other crimes, probably for this type of statements, you will not be permitted to say, I want to see him in person. You will say to video conference, you can ask, but you should be permitted to cross-examine. If you are not provided the opportunity to cross-examine, the reliance on that particular statement is bad law. There are two things that the court can do. Take a magnanimous view in favor of justice and say, we quash it. They generally don't do. It happened once in Pirai Churi's case, Madras High Court, 302, page number 40. They quashed it. Department of the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said, we will not quash the assessment order for failure to give cross-examination. Send the matter back. Let the SSC cross-examine, then proceed. So, not providing cross-examination will not render the assessment invalid. At most, you will be able to, from the court, get a direction to the officer to provide you a cross-examination, but it has to be given. But you're supposed to ask for it. And other documents and information, again, there are judgments to say, the moment department is using any information against you, principles of natural justice suggest that they are supposed to give it to you. Assuming they don't adhere to that and they don't give that information to you, you have every right to seek a copy of them. It is similar to statements recorded during search. At the first instance, department is not duty bound to provide the statement to you. Your own statement, department is not duty bound to give it to you. Whereas, if the contents of the statement are being used against you, the statement must be given to you. Because Constitution itself is very clear, wherein Article 20 saying that no person shall be prosecuted and punished for the same offence more than once. You cannot penalize me on something and use, and also I am permitted under law, under Constitution, that I need not make a statement which is against me. I can defend myself in any which way. They cannot hold a statement which I have given to hold against me. So therefore, my own statement they are using against me, they are supposed to give a copy, and the regular benefit available to me is what? Say that the statement was not proper, the evidence was not properly given by me, I am giving you evidence. You are supposed to rebut your statement as to why the contents of the statement are not proper. But insofar as 271 WAD is concerned, it's a little draconian. Probably all of us have to be a little more careful. Considering the fact that Companies Act amendment is coming, it will be deferred or whatever, but saying that audit trail for the entry, wherein you get the entries which means it can also be a situation wherein entry was there, altered, edited, omitted. So getting this situation wherein it's getting tougher and tougher for, but probably any of you can tell me whether is there a law that we are supposed to maintain books of accounts only in a computerized system? From my understanding, no. There is no law which says that I am supposed to maintain the books only in electronic format. So if it's not only in electronic format, can you then have Books of accounts for the purpose of income tax to be maintained manually. You'll finish everything in your computer system. Again, I'm saying I'm taking hypothetical situation. Some entries are being passed by accountants. You will say this is not authentic, it is not final. You don't know. After everything, you write it manually. Then what happens? This is the books of accounts for the purpose of income tax. Is it possible? You don't know. Maybe it's possible. There's an amount to maintain two separate sets of accounts? Need not be. But it's only merely job of compilation of data and these other things. And anything and everything which is being entered does not mean that it is final. Maybe there's a typographic error. Salary paid of 1,000 rupees to us people. Entered as 1 lakh. Then what is the position? Department generally uses one theory. What is that? They use theory of human probabilities to say that you could not have done this because it is not. Similarly, if there is a genuine error wherein what was 1,000 or 10,000 was entered as lakh or 10 lakh, can you say that it was first a false entry? It was a false. Can you first say it's false entry, then prosecute you straight away? That is, they will find it 271 AAD. So a lot of practical difficulties will come in because if you look at 271 AAD read with 270 capital A subsection 9, dealing with penalty for misreporting and underreporting, 270A9 provides exhaustive list of cases where underreported income shall be construed as being due to misreporting. That is, misrepresentation or suppression of facts, failure to record investment in the books, claim of expenditure not substantiated by evidence, recording of any false entry in the books of account, failure to record any receipt in books of account having a bearing on total income, then failure to report any international transaction. So there is a possibility that you can penalize twice, 270 capital A subsection 9 for underreporting due to misreporting and 271 AAD for false entry. Which is why then you can also say that take a position of the double jeopardy principle where you cannot penalize me for the same offense more than once. So maybe ultimately they may penalize you once. It means you're admitting that you have done this. But expecting them, can they do this? They can't. But then the fact remains that you are admitting that. So you have to be very careful with 270A capital A9 because it is the first of the assessment year which began. The assessment year 17-18 was the first time when 270 capital A penalty has been started. Till 1/4/2017, 271 months he was ruling the rules. Because though 270A came in 3 years ago, they said it with effect from 1/4/17. So for such of those assessment years, it's beginning. So for assessment year 17-18 onwards, they started with 270 capital A. Though the section has been there on the statute for more than 3 years now, it did not have any application. I think from last year's, the first time orders which came last year, they started with 270 capital A. So we have to be very careful going forward in terms of 270 capital A and 271 AAD, and also probably keeping in mind how the GST authorities will view this fake invoices. And of course, the CA Institute's disciplinary committee insofar as actions by the member. So this is probably a very draconian provision because you also already they have brought up a penalty section saying that the chartered accountant can be levied a penalty for his inactions. Therefore, we have to be very clear when and the audit documentation will assume utmost significance when we take up this issues and especially by doing audit because compared to the Form 3CD which existed probably 10-15 years ago till probably last 5-6 years, the quantum of information now which is being fed into 3CD is much more than probably what accountant will do in the house for the client. Every bit of information is available. And can that be regarded as something that you have not taken due care? Because the quantum of information which is being sought is huge now. Therefore, due care and exam must be carried out when the certification happens because we are at the forefront, I would say, we are front line for the way of penalty if there's something comes up. which we have to be very careful in terms of this penalty provisions. Any general issues, I'm going to take up probably.
The audit trail, even that the accounting software should have the facility of audit trail.
Correct.
Indirectly, it means that you cannot maintain the books of accounts in manual.
But Companies Act 2013 nowhere says that the books of accounts will be maintained electronically only. To the best of my understanding and knowledge, I don't think the Companies Act uses the term saying you're supposed to maintain the books of accounts only electronically.
Probably they will amend also.
What can happen in future, we cannot predict. But from my understanding, if it's why that if you can educate me on whether there's a provision. If there is no such provision that you're supposed to maintain electronically only. Mercantile system of accounting is mandatory for companies. Have they said it has to be on accounting software and be manual? Very simple. If you are maintaining manual, for small trader you can keep writing it twice or thrice. Otherwise you can't, no? The change and the entry and other things will happen. But that particular notification is straight out of the, it's like a joint.
I have to forget this audit.
And probably disclaimer will be the opinion for the other report saying subject to the entries which were modified or altered before we look into particular thing. And the audit trail becomes even more important when they're supposed to give the list of general entries to be passed. That will be correlated with what was earlier existing. Spelling mistakes, it will show. Even if there is a spelling mistake and the entry is altered, it will show. So that so and so entry was altered. Maybe it's a genuine error of a debit and credit. Office expense to staff expense. The audit trail will show there is a change.
The important thing is they are saying it should be on for all the 365 days.
Huh.
That also we have to qualify. The audit trail was on for all the 365 days.
Right. Because we do an audit post or during concurrent audit or half yearly audit or doing only once at the end of the term. Whether such a thing is possible, don't know as to be. Ultimately, I'm probably speculating or thin air, whatever. Going forward, if this becomes the law, they may remove the audit for certain companies below a particular threshold. Turnover less than so and so, it may be out of the mandatory audit. See, already in lieu with the Digital India campaign, up to 10 crore turnover, if 95% of the transactions are through digital mode, we're exempt from tax audit. Similarly, if you bring about a cap of, I think, turnover of 5 crore or something, I think 99% of companies are out of it. If you bring a cap of 1 crore, about 85% of companies or something are out of the ambit of the audit. So then probably the NCA also will start looking at the offences in Companies Act more seriously. Which we don't know, we're speculating, but how things have evolved in the past, looking at how one amendment comes in and slowly the change is happening, it is possible that they will do away with audit for a class of companies. Private limited companies having turnover less than. So then probably it becomes a self-certification, like how they remove the GST audit and said it's self-certification. Something may come up. And on exceptional cases, when cases are picked up by the NCA to look into the accounts and other things, if irregularity is found, they may, it's more like assessment there and whatever new proceedings in the Companies Act may be continued. It's quite possible.
There will be the discouraging small firms to go for private limited or limited companies.
With the statistics reveal that a lot of private limited companies have been formed, we don't know how many are active. They say that people are moving towards being known as a corporate entity, but it has its own perils. We're done with. Right? Any one last question there, sir? Getting up. Else we can close.
What is the penalty for false entry?
271 AAD equal amount of the entry. So, equal amounts. They're being very fair, sir. They're not saying, I will leave 300%, 400%, nothing. They're not saying, I will leave.
The phone false entry 1 crore, 1 crore.
If it is false entry or omission, the assessing officer may direct that such person shall pay by way of penalty a sum equal to the aggregate amount of such false entry or omitted entry. So, They're being fair. They're not saying 50%, under reporting 200%, 100 to 300%. Whatever you're, it's the same thing. I'm not,
Asking more.
whatever is there, whatever is found.
Not the income, false entry.
What are the false entries? What is false entry?
Suppose if the purchase is the false entry for 1 crore, the demand of 1 crore is a penalty.
That is the law as we speak today. Thank you for your patient hearing.
Members, on behalf of Managing Committee of Family Branch, I take this opportunity to propose formal vote of thanks for today's healthy circle. Wholehearted thanks to our speakers, Yes, for spending his valuable time and giving us an excellent presentation. Big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. As a token of gratitude, I will now request our Bangalore Ramsey Council Chairman and past Chairman Shivaram Bhatt sir to kindly come forward to present a moment to our speaker. Huge round of applause. This one. I also thank all the participants who are physically present here and also virtually viewing the programs for your active participation and support. With reference to the further programs, we have a comprehensive workshop on transformation from CA to CFO starting from tomorrow and till 7 days on 8, 9, 10, 15 and 17 April 2021. And we also have 1 day comprehensive workshop on transformation from CA to CFO, physical and virtual on 17th April. I request all of you to candidate. Now we should sample the program, but